Hi, how you doing? All right, I'm back with the second installment of the question about how you can be helping students to be listening and following instructions in school settings. So in the last video, I talked about students who are very unaware of the instructions being delivered. In this video, we're going to work on the second problem. And if you remember, the second problem is that the students' language and comprehension is below what's being expected in the classroom. So for these students, because of their language deficits, maybe their vocabulary is smaller than their peers, or we might find that their ability to fluently use and speak in sentences is not quite where they should be with their peer group. This can create tremendous problems. It means that when the teachers are delivering group instructions, discussing topics, explaining things to the students as to what they should be doing, they may not be able to understand. A bit like if I was placed in a Japanese classroom and I was listening to Japanese, then it's going to really impede my ability to learn because I don't speak very good Japanese. It can also create a lot of behavioral problems, because the children who don't understand maybe what's happening are going to get bored. So they're going to start to walk away, or they're going to start to walk around, or they're going to start to fiddle, or do other things that will be construed as problematic behaviors. But it may just be that they're bored and don't really get or understand like what's really happening in the classroom. So there are no real quick fixes to this problem, and typically schools are not very well equipped in terms of delivering very individualized, concentrated, systematic language instruction. That's not really what schools are trained to do. So it may be a challenge. So for home, what really needs to happen is you need to get some kind of language evaluation. You need a comprehensive look at your child to see exactly what it is they can do, what it is they can't do, in all of the different areas with language, so you get a really good picture of how far are they behind, you know, what can other kids their age do, what can your child do, what are all of the things in between that they may need to learn, how much, you know, curriculum do they need to catch up. No different than if you were, you know, a 8-year-old child learning maths, you know, in an 8-year-old classroom, and the teacher says, oh, he's not very good at maths, he's behind. You would have to identify first, well, what maths can he do? What can he not do? Can he do addition? Does he recognize numbers? Can he do multiplication? You know, exactly where is the student specifically in understanding language, speaking and using language spontaneously, as well as asking questions, describing things, you know, what is the scope of what they're able to do and where they're at. Once you've got that good picture, that should give you a good indication of how much time you're going to need to spend to fill in the gaps. If you've got a child who's quite far behind, you're going to need to spend a lot of hours filling in those gaps. I typically find for many children with ASD that if they're, you know, 2 or 3 years behind in their language, doing sort of an hour of language instruction a week is not going to come close usually to catching them up and getting them to where they need to be. But, you know, you need to look at the structure of what's there and, you know, think about how many hours of instruction a week are going to be necessary to try to keep up and also catch up. Usually it's, you know, with us here, we're usually spending a lot of hours a week working on language and communication skills. Often those kinds of skills are most efficiently taught usually in a one-on-one. Just like for me, if I was going to learn Japanese or Mandarin, I would probably learn the most rapidly in individual one-on-one sessions. With those sessions, you need to have a very clear objective of what it is you're learning in those sessions, so you could objectively evaluate how that's going. So there should be written down goals that talk about specific kinds of speech concepts or speech capabilities that we're looking for the child to develop. So at the end of each week, you can review, okay, so does he know how to answer why because questions now? Can he follow a two-part instruction? Is he able to do delayed, instructions? Or whatever the targets are. Has he learned these vocabularies now? Is he able to describe using a sentence? These are all examples of goals that would be potentially for a student that can be mapped out and evaluated. So you can tell at the end of a month, if your goal was to learn all of these things and you've only learned a few, that may mean that the instruction is not very good. It may mean that you haven't spent enough time to do it. Or whatever the problems are, but you can see the rate of learning isn't what you're looking to really, expect to catch up. So a lot of what we would do at home is really looking at how you're going to provide time in the catch-up process, also how you embed, those kinds of language goals across the day to have the student more familiar. So for your son is learning two-step instructions, spending time at breakfast time to provide, get me the spoon in the bowl, get me the cereal and the milk, go get your bag and put on your shoes. You'd have increased the density of those kind of instructional formats across the day to provide more practice. For school, as I said, there may be less they can do. I think for the school, it's great if they can know, what the language level of the student is as well. It helps the school to know what kinds of things you might be working on at home so they can embed some of those instructions or tasks in the school. They can make some accommodations. Again, depending on the school and how much the deficit is, that may be more difficult. For example, speaking to the student in shorter sentences, having somebody describe the task to the student. These can all help a student sort of survive in school, but they're not really going to be that helpful in the long run because they don't really teach the student to be any better at language. They just accommodate. And sometimes, over time, those accommodations may become more and more difficult to provide if the student really isn't accessing the curriculum and the lessons in the way that the other students do. So really the key here is really to be providing a very systematic, good language-based program on a consistent basis to really help catch the students up. If they can understand more and their language skills can improve, that is certainly going to help them to be able to follow those kinds of instructions in school and be more successful. Okay, in the next video, we've got one last point, which is helping students that they don't want to listen to the instructions. They can perhaps understand what's going on. They're quite aware of the instructions being delivered, but unfortunately, they have other ideas and would prefer to do other things or would not want to follow those directions. And I'm going to talk about a plan as to how we can work on those kinds of skills in my next video. Okay, thank you very much.